The fluorescent lights of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport buzzed overhead as I stood frozen, my boarding pass trembling in my hand. The words my boss had just screamed at me echoed through the terminal like a death sentence. "You're too old, Angela. This company needs fresh blood, not some washed-up 50-year-old who can't keep up." 23 years of my life poured into Richardson Tech Solutions, and this is how it ended. Not in a boardroom with dignity, not with a gold watch or a farewell party, but here surrounded by strangers with their phones out, recording what would probably become another viral video of workplace humiliation. My mahogany skin felt hot with shame as passengers turned to stare. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed for me. Others whispered behind their hands. A few teenagers actually had the audacity to snicker. But it was the pity in the older travelers' eyes that cut deepest. They knew, they understood that what was happening to me could happen to any of them. "Did you hear me, Robinson?" Marcus Richardson's voice cracked like a whip across the departure lounge. His face was red with what I'd learned to recognize as performative rage, the kind he put on when he wanted to make an example of someone. "Clean out your desk when you get back. Actually, don't bother. Security will pack up your things and mail them to you." My throat felt like sandpaper. The project proposal in my laptop bag, the one I'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting for our biggest client, suddenly felt heavier than concrete. All those late evenings, all those weekends sacrificed. All those times I'd chosen the office over my daughter's recitals or my mother's Sunday dinners for this. "But Marcus," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper, "the Morrison Industries presentation will be handled by someone who actually understands modern technology." He cut me off, his words slicing through me like broken glass. "Someone who doesn't need to ask their grandson how to use TikTok." The crowd had grown larger. I could see gate agents pausing their announcements to watch. A businessman lowered his Wall Street Journal. A mother pulled her young son closer, probably afraid he might catch whatever disease of obsolescence I apparently carried. But something strange happened in that moment of complete devastation. As I stood there, absorbing the cruelest blow of my professional life, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just hurt or anger, though those were there too. I felt clarity, crystal clear, diamond bright clarity about who Marcus Richardson really was, and who I had never stopped being. I straightened my shoulders, adjusted the colorful kente cloth scarf around my neck, the one my grandmother had given me for strength, and looked him directly in the eyes. "You're making a mistake, Marcus." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The only mistake I made was keeping you around this long." What Marcus Richardson didn't know, couldn't know, was that Harold Morrison himself was sitting in seat 1-2A of our flight to Denver. What he couldn't predict was that sometimes the universe has its own sense of timing, its own way of balancing the scales. As I stood there in that airport, surrounded by strangers and stripped of the identity I'd worn like armor for over 2 decades, I had no idea that the next 8 hours would change everything, that the humiliation burning through my chest would transform into something I'd never imagined possible. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're really worth. Where are you watching this story unfold? Drop your city in the comments below. Love connecting with people from all over the world who understand that age isn't a limitation, it's a superpower. The morning had started with such promise. I remember standing in front of my bedroom mirror at 4:30 a.m., carefully applying my makeup and choosing my outfit with the precision of a general preparing for battle. The navy blue blazer with the small golden buttons, my power suit, I called it, the one I'd worn to every major presentation for the past 5 years, the one that had seen me through promotions, successful pitches, and countless victories that had somehow all led to this moment of absolute defeat. My reflection stared back at me, and for the first time in months, I really looked at myself. When had the lines around my eyes become so pronounced? When had the silver threads woven so boldly through my natural hair? Despite the careful styling my daughter Jasmine insisted made me look distinguished. At 50, I was watching my face tell the story of 5 decades lived fully, fearlessly, and with purpose. Yet standing there in that airport, I felt like those lines were evidence, presented against me in some cosmic courtroom where experience was a crime and wisdom was inadmissible. Irony wasn't lost on me that I'd helped Richardson Tech Solutions grow from a scrappy startup to a multi-million-dollar corporation. I was there when Marcus was still using his college laptop held together with duct tape. when our office was his parents' garage, and when landing a $5,000 contract felt like winning the lottery. I'd written the code that powered our first breakthrough software. I'd worked 18-hour days debugging programs that would eventually make Marcus rich enough to afford his Tesla and his penthouse and his insufferable arrogance. But corporate America has a funny way of rewriting history. Suddenly, I wasn't the architect of our foundational systems. I was the old guard holding back progress. I wasn't the mentor who'd trained half our current staff. I was the deadweight, dragging down our dynamic, forward-thinking culture. The same qualities that had once made me invaluable, my attention to detail, my methodical approach, my preference for thorough testing over rushed releases, had somehow become liabilities in a world that worshipped at the altar of youth and speed. Walking through the airport that morning, I'd felt proud carrying the Morrison Industries presentation. 3 months of research, countless iterations, innovative solutions that married cutting-edge technology with practical implementation. Harold Morrison's company was worth $30 million, and they were looking for a tech partner who could help them modernize their supply chain without sacrificing reliability. It was exactly the kind of challenge I lived for, complex enough to be interesting, important enough to matter, and perfectly suited to someone with my specific combination of technical skills and business acumen. I'd scheduled calls with my contacts in Denver, researched the city's tech scene, even practiced my presentation until I could deliver it flawlessly while making breakfast. Jasmine had rolled her eyes at my preparation level, calling me extra with the fond exasperation only a 25-year-old daughter can muster. But I'd learned long ago that being a black woman in tech meant being twice as prepared, 3 times as polished, and 4 times as resilient as everyone else in the room. The flight was supposed to be routine, a 2-hour hop to Denver, followed by a presentation that could secure Richardson Tech's biggest contract to date. I had my lucky pen, my backup laptop, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your material inside and out. The airport bustled around me with the familiar energy of business travelers and vacation. Everyone focused on their own journeys, their own destinations, their own dreams. Marcus had been acting strange for weeks, but I'd attributed it to stress about the Morrison deal. Late-night emails questioning my approaches, sudden requests for progress reports, cryptic comments about bringing fresh perspectives to established accounts. I'd dismissed his behavior as typical pre-presentation nerves, the kind of micromanagement that afflicted executives when big money was on the table. Now, standing in the aftermath of public humiliation, I realized those hadn't been nerves, they'd been the groundwork for sabotage, the careful construction of a narrative that would justify what he'd clearly planned all along. The presentation I'd spent months perfecting wasn't meant to showcase my abilities, it was meant to be my swan song. The final project before he swept me aside for someone younger, cheaper, and more willing to accept his particular brand of leadership. As the crowd began to disperse, returning to their phones and their coffee and their own concerns, I found myself alone with the crushing weight of a life's work suddenly declared worthless. But somewhere in the depths of that despair, a small flame flickered, because Marcus Richardson might have had the power to fire me, but he didn't have the power to diminish what I'd accomplished, what I knew, or what I was still capable of achieving. The thing about public humiliation is that it happens in layers, like sediment building up over time until it becomes something solid and suffocating. First comes the shock, that moment when your brain simply refuses to process what's happening because it's too absurd, too cruel, too far outside the boundaries of normal human interaction. Then comes the heat, spreading across your face like wildfire as every pair of eyes in the vicinity turns toward you, transforming you from a person into a spectacle. Marcus had orchestrated this moment with the calculated precision of a military operation. He'd waited until we were at the gate, surrounded by other passengers, where I'd be too shocked and too dignified to cause a scene. He knew I wouldn't scream back at him, wouldn't create the kind of dramatic confrontation that might make him look like the villain he clearly was. He was counting on my professionalism, my composure, my deeply ingrained belief that maintaining dignity was more important than defending myself. "You know what your problem is, Angela," he continued, his voice carrying that particular tone of false authority that mediocre men use when they want to sound important. "You think loyalty matters more than results. You think showing up every day for 23 years entitles you to something. But this isn't the 1990s anymore. This is a business, not a charity for washed-up programmers who can't adapt to change." Each word hit like a physical blow. Washed up, The accusation stung not because it was true, but because I knew it was the narrative he'd been building in boardroom conversations I wasn't privy to, in performance reviews that focused more on my cultural fit than my actual contributions, in those subtle comments about bringing in new blood that I'd foolishly interpreted as expansion rather than replacement. Could see the gate agent, a young black woman who couldn't have been older than with barely contained outrage. Her nameplate read Keisha, and something in her expression told me she understood exactly what was happening here. Not just the firing, but the specific cruelty of it. The way Marcus had chosen to strip me of my dignity in the most public way possible. She caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," with a sincerity that somehow made everything worse, that the businessman with the Wall Street Journal had folded it completely now, no longer pretending to read while he eavesdropped. A elderly white couple near the window seats were whispering to each other, the woman shaking her head with disapproval while her husband pulled out his phone. Were they calling someone? Recording? In the age of social media, every personal tragedy had the potential to become public entertainment. The Morrison contract requires fresh thinking. Marcus pressed on, apparently oblivious to, or perhaps energized by the growing audience. Young minds who understand artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain technology, not someone who still thinks Java is cutting edge. The technical accusations were what finally cracked something open inside me. Java. I'd been working with Python and R for data science applications since before most of his young minds knew what GitHub was. I'd built neural networks, implemented machine learning algorithms, and designed cloud architectures that were still running mission-critical applications 3 years after deployment. But he was counting on the audience not understanding the technical details, just hearing the broad brushstrokes of his narrative, old versus new, obsolete versus innovative, burden versus asset. "Marcus," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I designed the core infrastructure that's still handling 60% of our client load. I trained the team members who are implementing those cutting-edge solutions you're talking about. And the Morrison presentation incorporates AI optimization algorithms that I developed specifically for their supply chain challenges." He laughed as if my defense was somehow amusing. "See, this is exactly what I mean. You're living in the past, Angela, taking credit for other people's work, claiming ownership of innovations you couldn't possibly understand. Morrison Industries needs a partner who can take them into the future, not someone clinging to yesterday's solutions." The gaslighting was masterful in its cruelty. He was rewriting not just my recent contributions but the entire history of my career, transforming me from architect to bystander, from innovator to impediment, and he was doing it in front of dozens of strangers who would walk away from this encounter with the impression that I was exactly what he claimed, an aging employee who'd outlived her usefulness and couldn't gracefully accept reality. But something strange was happening as I stood there absorbing this character assassination. The more outrageous his claims became, the clearer my own worth appeared in contrast. Every false accusation threw my actual accomplishments into sharper relief. Every dismissive gesture reminded me of problems I'd solved, crises I'd navigated, innovations I'd pioneered when the stakes were high and the pressure was overwhelming. I thought of the late-night phone calls from panicked clients that I'd handled with patience and expertise, the junior developers I'd mentored who were now leading their own teams, the security vulnerabilities I'd identified and patched before they could cause damage, the elegant solutions I'd crafted for problems that had stumped teams of younger, supposedly more innovative minds. Marcus Richardson might have had the power to fire me, but he didn't have the power to erase what I'd built, what I'd learned, or what I was still capable of creating. And as I stood there in that airport, surrounded by strangers and stripped of the professional identity I'd worn like armor, I began to understand that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't an ending at all. After Marcus delivered his final blow and walked away, actually walked away, leaving me standing there like debris from a storm, a peculiar quiet settled over our section of the terminal. It was the kind of silence that follows something shocking, when people don't quite know how to restart their conversations or return to their normal activities. The teenagers who'd been snickering earlier suddenly found their phones fascinating. The businessman carefully refolded his newspaper. Even the constant airport announcements seemed muted, as if the entire building was holding its breath. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my boarding pass still clutched in my hand like evidence of a crime. Gate B-17 to Denver. Departure time, 9:45 a.m. Seat 14C. Such ordinary details for such an extraordinary catastrophe. My legs felt unsteady, not from physical weakness, but from the strange disconnection that comes when your reality shifts so suddenly that your body hasn't caught up to your circumstances. The first person to approach was Keisha, the gate agent. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd witnessed injustice and couldn't quite walk away from it. "Ma'am," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you all right? Do you need me to call someone?" Her kindness nearly undid me. After the cruelty I'd just experienced, basic human decency felt overwhelming. "I'm fine," I managed, though we both knew it was a lie. Just ... processing. "That man," she said, glancing in the direction Marcus had gone, "he had no right to treat you like that. No right at all." Her anger was quiet but fierce, the kind that comes from recognizing systemic injustice when you see it. "I've been working here for 3 years, and I see all kinds of business drama, but that was just ... She shook her head, unable to find words adequate to the moment. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than she could possibly know. In a world that had just declared me worthless, her validation felt like oxygen. "Really, thank you for seeing me." After she returned to her duties, I found myself gravitating toward an empty seating area near the window. Away from the main flow of foot traffic, I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Outside, planes taxied along the tarmac with purposeful efficiency. Everyone and everything moving toward destinations with certainty. I envied them their clear, trajectories. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "How'd the presentation go, Mom?" "Knock 'em dead." The message had been sent 20 minutes ago, back when I still had a job, still had a purpose, still had a reason to be on a plane to Denver. "How do you explain to your daughter that her successful, accomplished mother had just been publicly humiliated and discarded like yesterday's news? How do you maintain the illusion of having your life together when everything you've built crumbles in a single morning?" One typed and deleted a dozen responses. "Presentation went well. Too much of a lie. Having some workplace issues. Too vague and concerning. Your mother just became a statistic in corporate America's war on experienced workers. Too bitter, too raw for a text message." Finally, I settled on "Call you later, honey, love you," and hoped she'd be too busy with her own life to read between the lines. The elderly couple I'd noticed earlier were still stealing glances in my direction, and finally the woman stood up and approached. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair styled in a neat bob and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Excuse me, dear," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern accent. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but what that man did to you was unconscionable." Her husband joined her, nodding gravely. 42 years I worked for the same company," he said. "Started in the mailroom, worked my way up to regional manager. And you know what they told me when they decided I was too expensive? Nothing personal, Jim. Just business. As if a person's life work is just an accounting entry." "I'm Margaret," the woman said, extending her hand. "And this is my husband, Jim. We couldn't help but overhear. And we wanted you to know that what happened to you was wrong. Plain and simple, wrong." Their compassion was unexpected and deeply moving. Here were complete strangers offering solidarity in my darkest professional moment. "I'm Angela," I said, accepting Margaret's handshake. "And thank you." "I'm still trying to process what just happened, honey," Margaret said, sitting down beside me. "What just happened is that a small man tried to make himself feel bigger by diminishing someone extraordinary. But here's what I know after 74 years on this earth. The universe has a way of correcting these injustices. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the way we expect, but it happens." Jim nodded. "The best thing that ever happened to me was getting fired from Consolidated Foods. Took me 2 years to realize it. But that pink slip was actually a gift. Started my own consulting business and made more money in 5 years than I'd made in 20 with them." Their stories were meant to encourage, and in some abstract way they did. But sitting there in that airport, unemployment, fresh and raw as an open wound, it was hard to imagine any scenario where this humiliation could transform into triumph. I was 50 years old in an industry that worshipped youth. I was starting over in a job market that would probably take one look at my resume and decide I was either overqualified or obsolete. yet something in their certainty, their absolute faith that justice would somehow prevail, planted a small seed of possibility in the devastated landscape of my morning. Maybe Marcus Richardson had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Maybe the Morrison Industries presentation I'd perfected was about to find its true purpose. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're really capable of achieving. The boarding announcement interrupted my thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding Flight 12472 Denver. Boarding the plane felt like walking through a gauntlet of judgment. Word had somehow spread through that section of the terminal, maybe through the teenager's hood, recorded the confrontation, maybe through the businessman who'd witnessed everything, or perhaps just through the invisible network of gossip that seems to connect strangers in airports. People looked at me with that particular combination of curiosity and pity, reserved for minor celebrities and major disasters. I found my seat, one for seat, middle section, exactly where my boarding pass promised, and tried to make myself invisible. The last thing I wanted was to be trapped in airplane small talk with someone who might ask about my reason for traveling. The business trip would be technically accurate but emotionally devastating. Visiting Denver was too vague and would invite follow-up questions. The truth, I was supposed to give the presentation of my career, but instead I got fired in the most humiliating way possible, was definitely off the table. The passenger in 14A was already seated, a distinguished-looking black man in his 60s wearing an expensive charcoal suit and reading what appeared to be financial reports. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have seen him. He glanced up as I settled into the middle seat, offered a polite nod, then returned to his papers. The window seat remained empty as the plane filled up, giving me a small buffer of privacy in what had become a very public day. As we taxied toward the runway, I found myself replaying the morning's events with the obsessive detail of trauma. Had there been warning signs I'd missed? Conversations I'd misinterpreted? Meetings where my fate was being decided while I sat there blissfully unaware? The more I analyzed it, the clearer it became that Marcus had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The sudden scrutiny of my work, the questions about my approach to innovation, the subtle exclusion from strategic planning sessions. They weren't random criticisms, but carefully laid groundwork for this moment. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the businessman in 14A closed his folder and turned slightly toward me. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the warm authority of someone accustomed to being listened to, "but I believe I witnessed something terrible happen to you at the gate this morning." My stomach dropped. Of course he'd seen. Of course he knew. Yes, I managed, not sure how to respond to this acknowledgement from a stranger. "That was me. Harold Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "And I want you to know that what I witnessed was not just unprofessional, it was unconscionable." Harold Morrison. The name hit me like lightning. This was Harold Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, the client I was supposed to be courting, the $30 million contract that was meant to define Richardson Tech's future. The irony was so complete, so cinematically perfect, that for a moment I wondered if I was dreaming. "You single quotes I started, then stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. "You're the reason I got fired. You're the client my ex-boss was trying to impress. You're the person who just witnessed my professional execution." "I'm the CEO of Morrison Industries," he confirmed with a slight smile. "And you, unless I'm very much mistaken, are Angela Robinson, the software architect who's been developing supply chain optimization solutions for our potential partnership with Richardson Tech." The conversation I'd been dreading suddenly became the conversation I most needed to have. "Yes, sir, I am. Or rather, I was, as you witnessed this morning. My employment with Richardson Tech ended rather abruptly." Mr. Morrison shook his head with disgust. "I've been in business for 35 years, Ms. Robinson, and I've never seen such a display of poor judgment and worse character. That man Marcus Richardson, I believe, has no idea what he just threw away." His words were validation I desperately needed, but they also highlighted the absurdity of my situation. Here I was, sitting next to the very client I'd spent months preparing to meet, having just been fired for allegedly being inadequate to handle his account. "I had prepared a comprehensive presentation for your company," I said. 3 months of research, innovative algorithms tailored specifically to your supply chain challenges. I guess you won't be seeing it now." "On the contrary," Mr. Morrison said, his eyes brightening with what looked like genuine interest. "I would very much like to see what you've developed. You see, Ms. Robinson, I've been researching Richardson Tech for weeks, trying to understand their capabilities and approach. Your name came up repeatedly in my conversations with industry contacts. Talked to Angela Robinson. They said, she's the real talent behind their technical innovations. If you want something done right, make sure Angela Robinson is involved. The revelation was staggering. While Marcus had been positioning himself as the face of our company's technical expertise, the industry, the actual professionals who mattered had been pointing to me. I had no idea, I admitted. That tells me everything I need to know about Richardson's leadership, Mr. Morrison replied. A company that doesn't recognize and protect its most valuable assets is a company making poor strategic decisions. And after what I witnessed this morning, I have serious concerns about their judgment, their values, and their ability to represent my company's interests. The flight attendant interrupted to offer beverages, giving me a moment to process what was happening. Harold Morrison knew my work. He'd specifically requested my involvement. The firing that had felt like the end of everything might actually be the beginning of something extraordinary. But I was afraid to hope, afraid to believe that this conversation was leading where it seemed to be heading. Mr. Morrison, I said, after we'd ordered our drinks, I need to be transparent with you. I'm 50 years old. I was just fired in the most public way possible. And right now I don't have a job or a company to represent. I'm not sure what I can offer you. He smiled, the kind of smile that comes from someone who's seen enough of the world to recognize value when it appears. Miss Robinson, let me tell you what I see. I see a professional who maintained her dignity in the face of unconscionable treatment. I see someone whose reputation in this industry is so strong that multiple sources recommended her specifically. And I see an opportunity to work with someone whose skills and character have just been dramatically undervalued by her previous employer. The plane continued its journey toward Denver, but for the first time since that morning, I felt like I might be heading somewhere promising after all. Tell me about your Morrison Industries presentation, Harold said, settling back in his seat with the relaxed attention of someone genuinely interested in what I had to say. I'm curious to see how someone with your reputation approaches our particular challenges. I reached for my laptop bag, then hesitated. Everything felt surreal discussing business with the very client I'd been fired from serving. At 30,000 feet, hours after the most humiliating moment of my professional life. Mr. Morrison, I have to ask, Are you actually interested in hearing this, or are you just being kind to someone who's had a really terrible morning? His laugh was warm and genuine. Ms. Robinson, I didn't build a $30 million company by being kind to people out of pity. I'm interested because our current supply chain management system is costing us approximately $50,000 a month in inefficiencies. And everyone I've consulted tells me you're the person who can fix it. That number, $50,000 monthly, immediately triggered my analytical mind. I'd studied Morrison Industries for months, and I knew exactly where those inefficiencies were hiding. Your distribution centers in Memphis and Phoenix, I said without thinking. The inventory management algorithms are creating bottlenecks because they're not accounting for seasonal demand variations in your regional markets. Harold's eyebrows rose. Go on. Your Memphis facility serves predominantly southern markets where demand for industrial cooling systems spikes in March through May. But your current algorithm treats it like a steady-state system. Meanwhile, Phoenix handles Southwest distribution, where the demand curve is inverted tie-a-sneed from June through September. The result is inventory surpluses in the wrong locations at the wrong times, leading to expedited shipping costs and stockouts during peak demand periods. I was getting animated now, the way I always did when discussing complex problems with elegant solutions. But here's the interesting part. TUA customer service data shows that 63% of order delays aren't actually inventory issues, they're prediction failures. Your system is making decisions based on last year's data instead of predictive modeling that accounts for economic indicators, weather patterns, and regional business cycles. Harold was leaning forward now, his financial reports forgotten. And you have a solution for this? I have 3 solutions, I said, opening my laptop and navigating to the presentation I'd perfected over countless late nights. The first is Immediata, machine learning overlay that integrates with your existing systems to improve prediction accuracy by approximately 35% within 60 days. The second is Intermediata, complete restructuring of your inventory management protocols that should reduce those monthly inefficiencies by about 70% within 6 months. The third is Transformational, a fully integrated AI-driven supply chain optimization system that learns and adapts in real time. As I spoke, something magical happened. The humiliation of the morning began to fade, replaced by the pure joy of discussing work I was passionate about with someone who understood its value. This was who I really was, not the washed-up employee Marcus had portrayed, but an expert at the top of my field, capable of solving complex problems that had stumped other professionals. "Show me," Harold said simply. For the next hour, I walked him through my presentation with growing confidence and enthusiasm. Every slide represented weeks of research, every algorithm, months of refinement, every recommendation backed by data analysis that had kept me working until 2 in the morning, more times than I cared to count. But it didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like sharing a piece of art I'd created, a symphony of solutions orchestrated specifically for his company's unique challenges. Harold asked intelligent questions, challenged my assumptions in ways that sharpened my explanations, and occasionally made notes in his leather portfolio. This was the kind of professional interaction I'd been craving for months, a meeting of minds between equals who respected each other's expertise. "The AI implementation in Phase 3, he said at one point. "What's your projected timeline for full deployment?" 18 months for complete integration, I replied. "But you'd see measurable improvements within the first quarter. The beauty of this system is that it's designed to learn from your specific business patterns rather than imposing generic solutions. By month 6, it should be saving you more than its implementation cost every single month. And the team required for this level of implementation." I paused, realizing the complexity of my current situation. Traditionally, you'd want a project team of 8 to 10 people: systems architects, data scientists, integration specialists, project managers. But honestly, Mr. Morrison, I don't currently have a company infrastructure to support that kind of deployment. "What if you did?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. "I'm not sure I understand. What if you had the infrastructure, the resources, the backing to implement exactly what you've described, not as a contractor or consultant, but as a partner? What would that look like?" My heart started racing. Was he suggesting what I thought he was suggesting? "Are you talking about a joint venture, a partnership agreement?" "I'm talking about Morrison Industries creating a technology subsidiary, with you as Chief Technology Officer, specifically to develop and implement the solutions you've described, not just for our company, but for other manufacturing and distribution businesses facing similar challenges." The magnitude of what he was proposing hit me like a thunderbolt. Not just a job, not just a contract, but an entire company built around my expertise and vision. After 23 years of building other people's dreams, he was offering me the chance to build my own. "Mr. Morrison," I said carefully, "are you offering me a position?" "Ms. Robinson," he replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. "I'm offering you an opportunity to show the world what you're really capable of achieving." The pilot announced our descent into Denver, but I barely heard him. My mind was reeling from Harold Morrison's proposition, trying to process the possibility that my worst professional day might be transforming into my greatest opportunity. The man sitting beside me wasn't just offering me a job, he was offering me a chance to build something extraordinary from the ground up. "I need to be completely honest with you," I said, turning to face Harold directly. "This morning, when Marcus fired me, I felt like my career was over. At 50, in tech, after being publicly humiliated, I thought I was done. And now you're sitting here offering me the chance to run my own company." Harold's expression grew serious. "Ms. Robinson, let me share something with you. I'm 62 years old. I've built Morrison Industries from a small family business into a multi-million-dollar operation, and I've learned to recognize value when I see it. What I witnessed this morning wasn't the firing of an inadequate employee. Was the catastrophic failure of leadership that just handed their most valuable asset to their competition." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "This contains 6 months of research my team conducted on Richardson Tech Solutions. Would you like to know what we found?" My curiosity overcame my nervousness. "Please." "Richardson Tech has had exactly one major innovation in the past 3 years, the predictive analytics system that's been their biggest selling point to new clients. According to the patent filings, that system was designed and implemented by A. Robinson." He looked at me with raised eyebrows. "I assume that's you." I nodded, remembering the countless nights I'd spent perfecting those algorithms. The breakthrough moment when I'd finally cracked the optimization problem that had been plaguing our industry for years. "Their client retention rate is 87% overall," Harold continued, But for clients who worked directly with you, it's 96%. Their average project completion time is 14 months, but projects you led averaged 8 months. Should I continue? The numbers were staggering, but also painful. I'd known my work was good, but I hadn't realized how dramatically my contributions stood out from the company's overall performance. Why didn't Marcus see this? If the data is so clear, double quotes, because Marcus Richardson is a small man threatened by extraordinary talent, Harold said with a directness that took my breath away. He couldn't acknowledge your contributions without admitting that his company's success depended on someone he couldn't control, couldn't intimidate, and couldn't take credit for creating. The plane bumped through some turbulence, but the conversation had become so absolving that I barely noticed. So when you say you want to create a technology subsidiary, I mean exactly that. Morrison Technology Solutions, with you as Chief Technology Officer and primary stakeholder. We provide the initial funding, the infrastructure, the business development support. You provide the vision, the technical leadership, and the innovative solutions. Revenue sharing starts at 60-40 in your favor, with equity stakes that increase based on performance milestones. The offer was so generous, so far beyond anything I'd imagined possible, that I found myself suspicious. Mr. Morrison, this seems almost too good to be true. What's the catch? He smiled at my skepticism. The catch is that I expect excellence. I expect the same level of innovation and dedication that built your reputation in this industry. I expect you to assemble a team of the best people available, to push technological boundaries, and to deliver solutions that will revolutionize how companies manage their supply chains. The catch is that I'm betting my company's future on your abilities. I thought about Jasmine, about the conversation I'd have to have with her tonight. How do you explain that you started the day getting fired and ended it becoming a business owner? How do you process the whiplash between devastating humiliation and extraordinary opportunity? There's something else, Harold added, his tone becoming even more serious. Richardson Tech Solutions has been pursuing our contract for 8 months. They've scheduled 3 presentations, each one more generic than the last. Today was supposed to be their final pitch, the one that would either win our business or end our consideration. My heart sank. The presentation I was supposed to give, exactly. And now, thanks to Mr. Richardson's spectacularly poor judgment, I've seen that presentation. I've seen the innovation, the thorough analysis, the creative solutions that he was planning to present as his company's work. Harold's voice carried an edge of anger now. More importantly, I've met the person who actually created it. The full scope of Marcus's miscalculation was becoming clear. In his arrogance and cruelty, he'd not only lost his most valuable employee, he'd handed her directly to his most important prospective client. The very presentation he'd claimed I was too old to deliver properly had just earned me an offer to become a business owner. What happens to Richardson Tech's bid? I asked. There is no bid, Harold said definitively. After witnessing how Mr. Richardson treats his employees, how he fails to recognize or protect his company's most valuable assets, I have no confidence in his leadership or judgment. Morrison Industries will not be doing business with Richardson Tech Solutions. The plane was making its final approach now, the Denver skyline coming into view through the small oval window. Below us, the city sprawled across the landscape like a circuit board, all interconnected pathways and glowing nodes of activity. It struck me as oddly prophetic. I was literally looking down at a new landscape of possibility, a place where my career could be rebuilt from the ground up. I need to ask you something, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this? Not just the job offer, but this conversation, this kindness. You could have just observed what happened this morning and moved on. Harold was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the approaching runway. 25 years ago, I was passed over for a promotion at the company where I'd worked for 15 years. The job went to the owner's nephew, a kid fresh out of college with no experience and plenty of attitude. That night, I went home and told my wife I was going to start my own company. She thought I was crazy middle-aged black man in 1999, trying to compete against established businesses with more resources and better connections. He turned back to me with a smile that carried decades of hard-won wisdom. But you know what I had that they didn't? Experience, relationships built on trust and competence, a reputation for delivering on my promises. The very qualities that corporate America was so eager to discard turned out to be exactly what clients were looking for. The parallel wasn't lost on me, and now you're offering me the same chance you took. I'm offering you the chance to show the world what Happens when experience meets opportunity, he corrected. What happens when someone with your skills and knowledge gets to build something from scratch, instead of being limited by someone else's vision? As the plane touched down in Denver, I felt like I was landing in more than just a new city. I was landing in a new life, a new identity, a new understanding of my own worth and potential. The woman who had boarded this plane in Atlanta was an employee who'd just been discarded. The woman getting off in Denver was an entrepreneur about to build an empire. The airplane aisle was crowded with passengers retrieving their carry-on luggage, but Harold and I remained seated, neither of us wanting to break the spell of this extraordinary conversation. Around us, business travelers checked their phones and prepared for whatever meetings or obligations awaited them in Denver. None of them knew they were witnessing the birth of what would become one of the most innovative technology companies in the supply chain management industry. Before we leave this plane, Harold said, reaching into his briefcase one more time, I want to make something clear. This isn't charity. And it isn't an impulse decision based on sympathy for what you experienced this morning. This is the smartest business decision I've made in years. He handed me a business card, but it wasn't his Morrison Industries card. This one was different, elegant, black cardstock with silver lettering that read, Morrison Technology Solutions, and beneath it, Angela Robinson, Chief Technology Officer. I stared at the card in disbelief. You already had this made. I had it made 3 weeks ago, Harold said with a grin that transformed his entire face, after my research team finished their analysis of Richardson Tech and kept pointing me toward one name. I've been looking for an opportunity to approach you directly, but professional courtesy required that I work through your company first. Today's events simply accelerated my timeline. The card felt substantial in my hands, heavier than regular business cards, with a subtle texture that spoke of quality and permanence. My name, in silver letters, followed by a title that represented more responsibility and authority than I'd ever imagined possible. Chief Technology Officer, not of someone else's vision, but of a company built around my expertise. The funding is already approved, Harold continued. $2 million in startup capital, with additional rounds available based on performance milestones. Office space is available in our Denver headquarters, but you'll have complete autonomy over location, staffing, and strategic direction. $2 million. The number was so far beyond anything I'd expected that I almost couldn't process it. At Richardson Tech, I'd fought for months to get approval for a $50,000 software license. Now I was being offered complete control over a budget 40 times larger. I have one condition, I said, surprised by my own boldness. Name it. I want to hire Sarah Chen and David Martinez from Richardson Tech. Sarah is a brilliant data scientist who's been undervalued and overlooked for promotions. David is one of the most innovative systems architects I've ever worked with. But Marcus has been marginalizing him because he asks too many questions. If I'm going to build something extraordinary, I want extraordinarily talented people who understand what it feels like to be underestimated. Harold's smile widened. Done. In fact, I'll do you one better. We'll offer them positions that are 20% above their current salaries, plus equity stakes in the new company. Anyone talented enough for you to specifically request is someone I want on our team. The passengers were beginning to thin out around us, but I was in no hurry to leave this moment. Everything felt crystalline clear for the first time in months. The confusion and uncertainty that had plagued me at Richardson Tech, the sense that I was somehow failing to meet expectations I couldn't even understand, all of it was gone. In its place was the calm confidence that comes from being truly seen and valued for who you are. There's something I need to tell you, I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. I'm going to make you more money than you ever imagined possible. It wasn't arrogant to speak, in it was certainty. For the first time in my career, I would be working with someone who recognized my value, supported my vision, and provided the resources necessary to execute at the highest level. No more fighting for budget approvals, no more justifying every innovative approach, no more watching brilliant ideas get diluted by committees and compromised by politics. I believe you will, Harold replied, and I'm going to enjoy watching you prove it. We finally stood and gathered our belongings, joining the last few passengers making their way off the plane. As we walked through the jet bridge into Denver International Airport, I felt like I was entering a new chapter of my life, with a partner who understood both my potential and my worth. One more thing, Harold said as we reached the terminal. I'd like you to deliver that Morrison Industries presentation next week, not as a pitch, but as our new CTO presenting the technological roadmap for our supply chain transformation. Same presentation, but this time you'll be presenting it as the person who will actually implement every solution you've designed. The symmetry was perfect, almost poetic. The presentation that was supposed to demonstrate my inadequacy would instead showcase my capabilities. The client I was fired from serving would become my business partner. The public humiliation that was meant to end my career would become the launching pad for the greatest professional achievement of my life. As we walked through the airport together, two business partners discussing the future of supply chain technology, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the terminal's glass walls. The woman looking back at me was the same person who had been devastated at the Atlanta airport 6 hours earlier. But somehow everything about her appeared different. Her shoulders were straighter. Her expression was confident. Her entire bearing radiated the quiet authority of someone who had just discovered exactly what she was capable of achieving. Marcus Richardson had tried to define me as obsolete, washed up, unable to adapt to change. Instead, he had inadvertently introduced me to someone who saw me as revolutionary, invaluable, and perfectly positioned to lead the future of my industry. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of justice after all. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Morrison Technology Solutions, my conference room, in my company, preparing for a presentation that would validate every risk Harold and I had taken. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Denver stretched out beneath a crystalline blue sky, and I could see the Richardson Tech building in the distance, a constant reminder of how dramatically my life had changed. Sarah Chen and David Martinez sat at the polished conference table, along with the 12 other exceptional professionals we'd recruited to join our team. Every person in this room had a story similar to mine, brilliant individuals who had been undervalued, overlooked, or marginalized by traditional corporate structures. Together, we'd built something extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice, I'm pleased to report that Morrison Technology Solutions has just secured contracts worth $18 million in our first 6 months of operation. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Sarah actually stood up and whooped, her usual professional composure temporarily abandoned. David was grinning so widely, I thought his face might split. Even Harold, who rarely showed emotion in business settings, was beaming with pride. But that's not the best part, I continued, pulling up the next slide. 3 of those contracts came from former Richardson Tech clients who specifically requested to work with us after hearing about our innovative approaches to supply chain optimization. The irony was delicious. Marcus Richardson had fired me for allegedly being unable to attract and retain clients. Now, 6 months later, those same clients were abandoning his company to work with mine. Word had spread quickly through the industry about the new technology firm, founded by the woman Richardson Tech was stupid enough to let go. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Saw the article in Tech Weekly about MTS being named Most Innovative Startup of the Year. So proud of you, Ma. The article had come out that morning, featuring a photo of our team and a detailed analysis of how we'd disrupted traditional approaches to supply chain technology. The journalist had reached out to Marcus for comment about losing his former star employee. His response was predictably graceless. Ms. Robinson was a competent programmer, but she lacked the vision necessary for modern business challenges. Competent programmer, after I'd just revolutionized supply chain management for some of the largest companies in the country. He was still trying to diminish my accomplishments. Some people, I'd learned, would rather maintain their delusions than acknowledge reality. There's one more announcement, I said, bringing the room's attention back to the present. Harold has informed me that Morrison Industries' quarterly profits have increased by 37% since implementing our integrated supply chain system. As promised, this triggers our first major equity distribution. I handed out envelopes to each team member, watching their faces as they opened them to find equity certificates and bonus checks that would change their financial futures. Sarah actually gasped when she saw her bonus amount. David just sat there staring at his certificate, probably calculating how much his 5% equity stake might be worth if we continued growing at this pace. But the real victory, I continued, isn't measured in dollars or contracts. It's measured in proving that experience isn't obsolete, it's invaluable. It's showing that being 50 in tech isn't a liability, it's an advantage. It's demonstrating that when you combine deep knowledge with innovative thinking and proper support, there's no limit to what you can achieve. After the meeting, I remained in the conference room, looking out at the city where I'd landed that day 6 months ago with nothing but a laptop bag, full of rejected presentations and a heart full of hurt. The woman who had walked off that plane had been broken, discarded, convinced that her best years were behind her. The woman standing here now was the chief technology officer of the fastest growing tech company in the region, with a team of brilliant professionals who respected her leadership and vision. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in months. Richardson Tech Solutions. Angela Robinson, I answered, curious about what Marcus Richardson could possibly want. Angela, it's Marcus. His voice carried a false casualness that didn't mask the desperation underneath. I've been following your success with Morrison Technology, and I wanted to congratulate you on building such an impressive company. I waited, saying nothing. After 30 years in business, I'd learned that silence often revealed more than questions. Listen, he continued, I know we had our differences, but I think there might be opportunities for collaboration between our companies. Perhaps we could discuss some kind of partnership arrangement. Double quotes. The audacity was breathtaking. 6 months after publicly firing me for being too old and washed up, he was calling to suggest a partnership with the company I'd built from scratch. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of his mistake, but a transparent attempt to benefit from the success he'd tried to prevent. Marcus, I said, my voice calm and professional, I appreciate you reaching out. However, Morrison Technology Solutions has a strict policy of only partnering with companies whose values align with our commitment to recognizing and nurturing talent rather than discarding it. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to wonder if he'd hung up. Angela, he finally said, his voice smaller now, I may have been hasty in my decision regarding your employment. Perhaps we could discuss. No, I interrupted gently but firmly. We couldn't, but I do want to thank you for that day in the airport. Marcus, your decision to fire me publicly was the catalyst that led to everything I've accomplished since. In a way, you gave me the greatest gift possible, the freedom to discover what I was really capable of achieving. After I ended the call, I stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight and wonder of how completely my life had changed. The humiliation that had felt like an ending had been a beginning. The failure that had seemed final had been the foundation for unprecedented success. Outside my window, the sun was setting over Denver, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was symbolic. Every ending, even the most painful ones, eventually gives way to new light. At 51 years old, I wasn't just succeeding, I was soaring, and the best part was, I was just getting started.